The good life is going, I need to understand that I had this beautiful weekend. It's not always like that. Sometimes I work through the weekend, but I had this little window of opportunity to nourish myself at the same time that I'm paying attention and not turning away from what's happening globally. For me, the good life isn't erasing it. For me, the good life is not pretending it's not happening. It's the good life, and this is occurring at the same time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Rita Bozi. Rita is a multidisciplinary somatic relational trauma-informed facilitator, psychedelic therapist, somatic transformation educator, author, and podcast co-host. With 30 years experience in the healing arts, she is the director of Brilliant Healing Incorporated. She works with individuals and groups leading unique, experiential, and creative healing retreats. She trains, mentors, and supervises international students in her 3-module program, Somatic Relational Trauma-Informed Practices for Medicine-Assisted Facilitation. Her podcast, Punk Therapy, Psychedelic Underground Neurokindness, has had over 20,000 downloads, which she co-hosts with Dr. T. In 2013, Rita wrote, produced, and co-starred with Gabor Amate in the multidisciplinary show The Damage Is Done, which performed to sold-out houses. Her first novel, When I Was Better, released in 2022, is a winner of the Firebird Book Award and is a finalist for the 2022 Gunther International Literary Award for late historical fiction. She is a retired dancer, author, and performer. Hi, Rita.
Hi, Broderick. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. Reading that bio, like one of the hardest things for me to pronounce is gut.
That Goethe stuff, that German word, right?
I know.
The German philosopher, right? German's not an easy language, although we have similar roots there, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, I've heard so many people pronounce it like gutter. I'm like, I can't say it. I'd save my life, but
goth.
Yeah, I know that's the way that I've heard it originally, and anyway, it's fun to talk about that kind of stuff.
In your head, did it? Yeah,
exactly. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. You've done quite a few things there. There's a much longer bio that will be on the website, everyone. With a little bit more of what Rita's done and what Rita is doing. Very excited to have this conversation. Even though I read that bio, I still like for guests to introduce themselves briefly, because the bio, it's cool. It says a lot of stuff, but in the moment, you might want to describe yourself slightly different. So I want to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, well, in this world today, I'm really asking my question of, how do we stay human? How do we maintain our humanity and our empathy and understand that each human life is sacred? So if there's anything that I'm here to do in this world today is again to deal with my own shadow, all the historical and multi-generational and transgenerational, intergenerational wounds that are contributing to the energy in the world today, to do my part and encourage my students and my clients to dig deep, because there is a very dark force coming through now. And recently I attended the Oslo Freedom Forum, a human rights conference held by the Human Rights Foundation, chaired by Yulia Navalnaya, Alexei Navalny's widow. And, I was really shocked to hear that 72% of the world's population is living under an authoritarian government. So that really gave me pause because my parents lived under an authoritarian regime that had far reaching implications for their lives and for my life and for my brother's life. And so, if I am here to help welcome other human beings to feel safe, to feel like they can have a place to preserve their culture and their heritages and their languages, I really want to be a part of that. I may not be joining the walk to Gaza right now because of my own personal professional commitments, but my heart is very much in that walk to Gaza. And my heart is very much in asking the people in my neighborhood here, because I live in Calgary, and 24 years ago when I moved here, it was a very white place and it was oil and gas and cowboys. And now it is transformed in 24 years. We have 156 languages here. It is
Mm.
multicultural. It is diverse. And every time I ask someone, where are you from and how did you get here? And how do you feel being here? And to hear from them that they are happy here and they like it here and they feel welcomed, I feel like we're doing something right in Calgary. So I really want to be a part of a culture change. And it doesn't matter what I'm doing, whether I'm doing psychedelic therapy or somatic therapy or relational therapy. I want to know that my body is, I'm working on the things I need to work on to make my body safe for you. So your brain can pick up cues that says you are welcome, you are valued, and you are part of creating this. So I talk to a lot of Uber drivers, and I talk to a lot of, some of my massage therapists from Nigeria, from Mongolia. My doctor is from East Indian, South African Muslim. My French teacher is French Iranian. And so I want to know their experiences of what is it about this place that makes them feel welcome, particularly right now, Broderick, particularly right now when there's so much hostility towards immigrants and refugees and people that are really looking to have basic human rights that we all deserve safety and we all deserve a place on this planet. So, you know, I think, there's the bio, but then there's what I feel in my heart, and that we are at great risk right now of really damaging so many generations to come. So when I think about this question about the good life, sure, there are things that I really enjoy, and I can describe a day to you that is the good life, but it's never going to be the good life for me until more people on this planet have basic human rights. So that's really fundamental to me, and I think that has a lot to do with where I came from and where my parents came from.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think you're laying out there that you see yourself as I'll use this word, you didn't quite use this word, but as a change agent, someone who
Mhm,
facilitates um, goodness in the world. I'll use that word as well.
mhm,
And that's beautiful. And I'm sure a lot of that will come out in this conversation here. So
mhm.
from the very beginning here, after that introduction there, what is good life? What is a good life? What does that mean? What is a life worth living? What does that mean to you?
Hmm. Okay, wow. That's such a big question.
I know, right? From the
I'm just going to
beginning,
take a
we'll unpack it.
minute, I'm just going to take a minute with that because, the good life is not available to everyone. I just want to start with that. Whatever we define that, it's not available to everyone. It's just not possible the way the systems have been set up. So how fortunate that I am that on Friday, I work a lot. I may have a 4-day work week, but it doesn't turn out to be that way when you run your own business. And I'm teaching internationally, and I've got a global reach at this point, global to a certain extent. So should I be so fortunate that on Friday I got to go to a yoga class? After my yoga class, I got to see my doctor, who I texted to get in to see her because we have a personal relationship. She's South African, and she says, it's so different there, my relationship with the clients. I have a direct text to my doctor to say, I need you to check out my lungs. I've had pneumonia. And I sit down with my doctor And there's this familial way that we interact with each other. It's very human. And then I ask her about her father and what her father's just been through. And to me, how fortunate I am that I got to see that doctor and have a personal connection with her and ask her about her father, what's just happened to him. Then after that, I drive up to this beautiful place called Sea Space in Calgary, and it's an old school that's been renovated into an art center. And they have what's called the Alliance Française, this beautiful alliance where you can learn French. And how fortunate that I should be to have a French tutor who is a wonderful man. And we have this funny bone. We hit each other's funny bone, and he's telling me about his fear because, Israel had just, fired the first shots into Iran, and he told me how scared he was because his parents lived 200 meters from the site, and that we should sit there and talk about what's actually happening for us. And then we launch into French. How fortunate I should be to have another language and to be able to sit with a tutor who I really care about and who cares about me, and we laugh and we curse and we get upset about the situation in the world. And then how fortunate I should be that after that I come home and I should be able to eat a really beautiful meal before I do a contact improv dance with a friend of mine who's Filipina, and that we have this incredible connection together, moving our bodies and dancing together. And then how fortunate I should be that after that I go to a queer film fest and watch a movie on queer rights and the change in legislation 30 years ago in Alberta, and that there are, we're having to really reassert queer rights, and that I have friends with me that are, been married for 30 years, right? And so I think how lucky I should have that I have a day where I have so much variety in my life, where it's about my body, it's about other people, it's about hearing about their stories and supporting sort of a wide range, a wide spectrum of life. And then that same weekend, how lucky I should be to be able to go to a foraging course to learn about pine trees and all the different things that spruce and pine gift us. And then to spend time with my husband, to go to a sauna to recoup. So that was an extraordinary, and when we had dinner with friends, a friend of mine plays the piano and the violin, the cello and the mandolin and the ukulele, and they're just highly creative people. And so I feel turned on. I can feel turned on when I have a weekend that's full of variety and going here and going there. And, I want to say that at the same time that I'm getting to enjoy this really privileged weekend, I'm also following, the Freedom Flotilla and the 12 activists that were on a little boat that were trying to get to Gaza to deliver aid and food, and they were intercepted by Israeli forces and put into prison in Israel, and that they've been released. So I've been watching that. And at the same time, I'm paying attention to the fact that we have what's called the G7 here right now in Kananaskis, close to us, where world leaders are coming together to discuss some critical crises. So for me, the good life isn't just forgetting about all that stuff. The good life is going, I need to understand that I had this beautiful weekend. It's not always like that. Sometimes I work through the weekend, but I had this little window of opportunity to nourish myself at the same time that I'm paying attention and not turning away from what's happening globally. For me, the good life isn't erasing it. For me, the good life is not pretending it's not happening. It's the good life, and this is occurring at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to go to, oh my God, how lucky I was to go to Oslo to the Freedom Forum and listen to a panel of 4 women, one from Sudan, one from Libya, one from Afghanistan, one from Ethiopia, talking about gendered violence and how does it happen? And for them to say, please don't look away. And I go, how lucky I am to hear these women, how strong they are, and that they don't leave their countries, but they stay to work to change what's happening. And at the same time, how fortunate I was to go into these beautiful floating saunas in Oslo and be in a culture that's really working well. no culture is perfect, but it is a country that's doing a really good job of taking care of its citizens. So to me, the good life is when the government actually cares about the humanity of people and cares about, you know, basic living wages, you know, cares about incorporating immigrants, but not changing them into a melting pot, but allowing their traditions to exist, and also understanding, where did these people come from? You know, where did all these people come from? So I don't know. And so there's one more question. Living the good life. I wanted to say that it's not available to all of us because some of us are carrying unbearable levels of transgenerational trauma, unbelievable levels of transgenerational trauma. And how do we reach those people to create a sense of safety and healing? Because, like, even healing is a privilege right now in the world. We really don't understand the scope of what's happening to future generations right now. So, you know, I have to remind myself every single day that good life is not turning a blind eye. It's not saying it's too much for me. It's not saying I can't look at this. It's saying I look at this and I'm very much aware that my circumstances could change. If we look at, you know, Bosnia, Sarajevo 30 years ago, you know, cultures living well together, and all of a sudden, you know, something changes. So it's never taking it for granted, you know. It's being so excited that I can wake up and water a tiny little garden that I have and watch these sprouts grow and go, God, I'm lucky, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I want to unpack some of this. I
Sure.
think, you know, I think I think the good life is available to everyone actually. And I think is how we define what the good life is. And that's why I want to hear a little bit more from you about what does that look like? I know so you in your experience you had access to all these different experiences and being in a very diverse place and things of that nature. I grew up in a very different world. It was pretty
Mm-hmm.
much black and white in
Mm-hmm.
rural South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's not the one I grew up
Different.
in, just so you know. It's not the one I grew up in. It's the one I live
Oh
in
yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah, just to be
yeah,
really
yeah.
clear.
Well,
Yeah.
for sure, yeah, yeah. But just it's just as an example, I think what is the message? So you know, there's lots of horrible things going on in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I'm trying to do with this podcast
Mm-hmm.
is highlight, and I think it's important to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It is the potential for the good.
Mm-hmm.
What is that question? Is it a philosophical question? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of unpacking that exploration into
Mm-hmm.
what makes life worth living,
Mm-hmm.
what is really important in life, what really matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you on all of that. Like whatever that means,
Mm-hmm.
it is not negating the horrible things in the world. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they're human beings, I think it's inescapable.
Mm-hmm.
No, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you're. I don't think you're not gonna ever have 100% of enlightened beings running around in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And until that's the situation, you're gonna have suffering. There's definitely going to be suffering. And I think the kind of the invitation that I have with this podcast is not that we turn a blind eye to the suffering in the world, but how do we highlight and unpack
Mm-hmm.
and explore what does that mean? And I think it does what you're saying. When we ask ourselves that question, we look at closely at our own lives and we reflect on what it means to be a human being and we take a look
Mm-hmm.
at the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of unnecessary suffering. We
Mm-hmm.
can't prevent everything,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's our duty as human beings to have this conversation, not just
Mm-hmm.
for our own personal lives,
Mm-hmm.
but to try to make sense out of how am I living and how is my living perpetuating or not the good or the bad in the world.
Mm-hmm.
what am I doing? What are choices am I making?
Mm-hmm.
What does it really mean? And when we really look into that question, I think we're more likely to try to facilitate whatever we come up with, the good life or a life worth living for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the nature of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Is in alignment with what you're saying. Is it's not just about our individual selves. We can have that individual conversation. I think that's important. But for us
Mm-hmm.
to hear that, like, what is really important? What is beneath all of these different things that we think is good for us or makes life worth living? And
Mm-hmm.
how can we maximize that for all human beings? And
Mm-hmm.
for me, all of life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one may ask me, that's an impossible task. You can't do that. I'm like, no, you're thinking about your own lifetime. I'm thinking generations and generations ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And what role am I playing to
Mm-hmm.
facilitate whatever we come up with? Because I don't think there's no one answer for what makes life worth living. And I think it constantly evolves and develops over time. Uh, but what makes that life worth living, as we keep having that conversation, I think we can mitigate
Mm-hmm.
some of the crazy suffering that we're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing in the world. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing so much suffering in the world because we're not having that conversation
Mm-hmm.
across cultures, across
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. Because if we were having that conversation, it would
Mm-hmm.
be foremost in people's minds as we interact with one another. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's because when we do that, certain themes are going to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're doing that as human beings on a grander scale, I don't think you're going to see that level of suffering that you see in the world, because people are like, this just makes no sense to do this and
Mm-hmm.
help create this kind of suffering. If that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense, anything that I
Mm-hmm.
just said there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what really comes to mind or two things is three things actually: embodied empathy, responsiveness, and care. To me,
Mm-hmm.
it's embodied empathy, responsiveness, and care. I'm deeply moved by Dia Khan, who is Norwegian, but she has a Punjabi background heritage, and she has made it her life mission. It's a really fascinating and captivating life story where she was initially um, pushed by her father to go into a music career. And then when because she was a woman of color in Norway, and he said, well, the best way that you can get recognition is if you become an artist. And she got to train with a lot of great uh, Indian artists, musicians. And then as she grew very popular, then she got threats from her own community, from the men in her own community, that you can't be out there doing what you're doing. And then her life fell apart, and then she ended up being a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker. And she went at it her own way without learning how to do any of that. She didn't know how to make a film, but she made a film and she did it her own way. And one of her very popular films is called White Right. And she went down into the heart of the white supremacist movement in America, and she wanted to understand. She wanted to understand why these men were the way they were. And she used a soft approach, an empathic approach, just to talk to them. She turned on the camera. And a lot of these men hadn't ever met women of color at this point. She talked to them, and by the end of these conversations, many of them were saying, well, you're my friend, and you're listening. She was responsive to hearing their stories, where they'd come from, many of them had horror stories about their lives as children. And what's really amazing, like she faced down her own fear. She said it was terrifying to go down there and to be filming in these white supremacist marches as a woman of color, the only one. And what was really remarkable about her, even as she comes out of this and she says, I had to face down my worst fears, is she comes out with a message of empathy. It's different than compassion. Compassion is different. Compassion is about acknowledging suffering, but empathy is a felt sense of the other's life, of what the other has lived. It's an embodied experience. It's getting someone, it's being responsive on a cellular level to go, oh my God, that's what it feels like to be you. And then we respond to that. We need to respond, and then we need to care. Like, we need to care about what is a small caring gesture that I can make for another person today that might stop me in my tracks? Like I learned this from beautiful, incredible Indigenous Cree elder here in Canada. His name is Thompson Highway. He went to residential school as a child, and there he learned how to play the piano. He's a very famous Canadian playwright, Indigenous Canadian playwright. And he wasn't rounded up to go to residential school. His parents sent him because he lived up in the subarctic, and his parents sent him on a float plane every year to go to residential school because they wanted him to get an education. And for him, it was like this place of wonder because there was a piano. He learned how to play. He learned how to sing, and he was very creative. Many children suffered profoundly, and we're still in reconciliation to this day in Canada over residential schools and the many mass graves that we've encountered here. But was really, that's a whole other story. Dia Khan talks about it, embodied empathy. With Thompson Highway, when I went up to meet him for lunch at the Banff Center about a month ago with my husband, he's lovely, he's aging, so he's walking a lot slower, and he's got a cane, and it took a really long time to walk, just to get to the car, because what he would do is Thompson would just stop. And he encountered the stage manager. He was up there doing a production. And he would stop and just have a conversation with the person that he wasn't saying, oh, I got to hurry up, we're going to lunch. It didn't matter if we had reservations. For him, it was like, oh, I've encountered you. I'm going to stop and have a conversation with you because that's what we do. We're Indigenous. Time doesn't matter. It's the relationship that matters. So I was just kind of noticing in myself how hungry I was and I wanted to get, but he didn't care. He was there. He encountered his stage manager for the production. He caught up with her, asked her how her day was. And then we'd walk another few steps. And then he'd stop again and talk to someone else because that's Indigenous time. It's you don't get where you don't rush to get to where you're going. If you stop and you encounter someone, you stop and you care about the relationship. It's such a relational way of being. And then responsiveness, for me, the good life, responsiveness, this conversation that you're inviting me into, it's the activists that get in a flotilla, they get into a boat and say, we are responding to people that are starving, mass starvation here. And if our governments aren't responding, we're going to respond to the cry of these children. So for me, it's like, how do we create a good life for everyone? Is that we're going to need to really understand, to get into the shoes, into the cellular existence of another person and understand what's formed them, and then respond to that, and then care about that. Really care in so many ways that we can, because it's so easy to turn that off and say, I don't care anymore. I'm saturated. It's too much, right? And understand that, yeah, we're getting a lot of it. How do we host that? Host the knowledge that we're getting that's coming through. So I've got teachers everywhere, and they inspire me. And the good life is certainly their comforts. It's nothing more wonderful than lying in a hammock reading a good book in the sun, being held that way and rocking. It's so beautiful. But the good life to me is also seeing when people band together and they say, no, this is not what we want. We're not doing this,
Yeah, that's great. So you tapped on a few things that I think I want to draw out. So empathy, embodied empathy,
Mm-hmm.
really feeling for another person to live well, to live. I guess one way of looking at this, a life worth living, is a
Mm-hmm.
life that is where you have care and concern for others,
Mm-hmm.
where you put yourselves in someone else's shoes and you
Mm-hmm.
feel into their life and think about the world through their perspective, not just through their worldview, the way that they see things, but the way they feel things. I know it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to do, but
Mm-hmm.
we can fuzz around and play around with that a little bit, at least to the best of our abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be in relationship with others, having relationships,
Mm-hmm.
interacting with other human beings, and I'll throw the word love in there. making connections with
Mhm.
people,
Mhm.
being responsive to the
Mhm.
world, being responsive, being responsible.
Mhm.
I'll add that to that, because when we're responsible, we're considering the actions in the world, and how those actions affect ourselves and others, and it includes our actions and the actions of others, and how all these things,
Mhm.
different things, come across each other.
Mhm.
Um, so all of those different things, and being able to relax and being able to have a sense of peace in the world, and I want to draw those out because just acknowledging it, I think those things are possibly available to all of us. And I think that if we were a little bit more empathic, again, I think there'd be less suffering in the world. Will it eliminate all suffering? No. But I think these are ideals. These are ideal capacities that we can all have. How can I have empathy for another human being? That's big. We harm people because we can't put ourselves in their shoes.
Exactly.
Uh, and
Exactly.
and people harm each other because of that, and
Because
people
of.
harm each other
Mhm.
because of tribalism and
Mhm.
separating ourselves from other beings. We've lost the
Mhm.
capacity to really connect and love other human beings.
Mhm.
Being responsible for each other, these are things that we can learn to do those things. And you could be a poor person in rural South Carolina, and you can be a person in the Midwest in the United States, and on the only exposure you have to are just people that's just like you, that look like you, a similar ethnic background.
Mhm.
You can still have a good life. You can still learn to be empathic. You can still learn to be
Mhm.
responsible. You can still learn to
Mhm.
have good
Mhm.
relationships. You can
Mhm.
do these things to take care of yourself. So these are important things to draw out, that I think, out of what you're saying. But I think that
Mhm.
these things could be available to people.
Mhm.
Ideally, is it ideal? Absolutely, is ideal,
Mhm.
because but from those ideals, we say, oh, I have values, I have principles,
Mhm.
and like, okay, then these are things that work towards. We work
Mhm.
towards having these values and these principles. In ancient Greeks talk about the good life, or a life worth living, is essentially a life of moral excellence,
Mhm.
engaging in action, moral action,
Mhm.
to move us towards the good. And that's a simplification of it, but it's pointing in that direction.
Mhm.
And I think it's not just, yeah, it's all those things, being calm, being present. I think all that's in there for sure. But this idea of moral excellence, and I think that taps into a
Mhm.
little bit what you're saying about all these things that are going on in the world, and how can we acknowledge them, and how do we as human beings, how can we learn to be more morally or ethically evolved? How do we
Mhm.
develop our capacity
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
good, to love, to do good in the world? Uh, that's what I'm getting from what you're saying.
Mhm.
And even just the first three things that you mentioned there are part of that process of cultivating moral excellence,
Mhm.
and not forgetting what's the pain that we suffer in our own lives, because we can overlook our own suffering too,
Well, and that's a
and then
problem.
also not to suffer in others. That's a big problem too, because if we
Mhm.
look over our own, we're not it's gonna be
Oh,
hard to empathize with someone
absolutely.
else.
Well, that's the shadow work, right?
Right.
That's the shadow work responsibility that we have, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you know, Darsha Narvaez, I'm going to butcher the name of her book if I don't look it up, but it's a really phenomenal book she's written about trauma and morality. Narvaez. I'm actually going to look it up while we're here, because she talks about the development of morality and how trauma seriously has an impact seriously has an impact on our morality. And morality from a left hemisphere perspective and morality from a right hemisphere perspective, again, is quite different. So, sorry, I just wanted to find this book while we're here. Here it is. It's one of my favorite. It's called Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, Evolution,
Mm-hmm.
Culture, and Wisdom. So Darshan Narvaez talks about, and I'm very inspired by her work about what's called the safety ethic. And then she's got the safety ethic, and then the social engagement ethic, and then the communal imagination ethic. But the safety ethic isn't what it sounds like. The safety ethic is born out of a protectionist mentality. The safety ethic is born out of trauma, unprocessed trauma. So people then protect themselves, they arm themselves. The ethic is to stay safe, and it's from the lens of protection that others are dangerous. And that comes from unprocessed trauma. That comes not from examining the shadow. And then she moves into, how do we develop this morality? Is through clearing perceptions from the body. And that's the hard work. That's the super hard work, because, the primitive brain and tribal brains really were, it was protecting against the stranger. And we've sort of come back to that again. It's kind of cycling back in our, in our world, where we view the stranger as a threat, right? And that's the safety ethic. And the safety ethic is that lockdown morality. And the morality is about protecting, is that we have to put certain people in jail. We have to get rid of people. We have to deport people. We have to jail them. They can't exist in our culture. And that's a morality that comes from this more left hemisphere. It comes more from the perceptions that haven't been cleared from the body. And it comes from disembodiment, when we can't feel the pain of the other, right? To feel the pain of the other, we need to be embodied. And so I have been thinking about what is a right hemisphere morality. And that comes from the felt sense. And that comes from the felt sense of understanding that you can't even begin to understand what another person has lived, what a refugee has lived to get here, what, so that right hemisphere gives us that possibility to get a glimmer of the other, or a glimmer of a culture, or the glimmer of the suffering, or the plight of a certain culture. So, I think about morality that's come from a left hemisphere, which are kind of, that hasn't done the embodiment work, that hasn't done the difficult work of feeling their own pain and healing that, to a different kind of morality, which is, I guess, what I've already said, is just considering what we don't know. Considering that before we see the other with suspicion, or as a stranger or different, how can we look for the similarities in our humanity, that on a cellular level everyone is trying to return to homeostasis. Everyone is trying to find an equilibrium, right?
Mm-hmm.
A kind of morality that engages each other in our beautiful differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Darsh, by the way, Darsh and our advisors on this podcast, by the way.
So she already talked about this. She's already talked about this.
Yeah.
How amazing. Yeah, she's
Oh,
incredible.
yeah. I love her. She's
I'm glad
awesome.
I'm giving her another plug there for her book.
Awesome. Yeah. And, I think there's this, this idea of a good life. I think, it feels like a lot of what's coming from you is this ethical moral piece, and expanding our capacity to take others into consideration. I guess the Ian McGilchrist in his left and right brain analysis, and how the right brain is much more encompassing of the whole, and can take into consideration the whole, while the left tends to be very it comes up with the story, and it can be very restricted and narrow, and justifying.
That's right.
Is needed. But how can we apply that left brain tendency to take into consideration the whole, that felt sense that you're speaking of, the presence, and how, and being able to, how do we integrate all of this? Because again, I really do believe this. Again, what motivated me to start this podcast this way is because of all the crazy suffering in the world. And like, everyone, hold on for a minute, time out. Let's think about this. Let's sit down and have a conversation here, and what does it mean for you? You know, no, not you directly, but the audience, anybody, third person. What does it mean? What makes a life worth living? That is such an important question. That's the question that kind of initiated a certain branch of aspect of Western philosophy, Greek philosophy, you know, Socrates, Plato, whatever, whoever you want to
Mhm.
credit this to. But traditionally
Mhm.
credited to Socrates. An unexamined life is not worth living.
Mm.
Because what it's suggesting is that
Mhm.
how do you ask that question? What is a life worth living? And when you do that, that opens up a can of worms. Because when you
Mm.
really are honest and looking inside yourself and you say what that means for you, and you think about who we are as a species, we are a communal species.
Mm.
We are here together. We're in this thing together. We didn't survive all isolated alone.
Mm.
We are a relational we are relational beings.
Mhm.
And when we start to ask that question, when we reflect on it, we ask that serious question, and we have to take into consideration others and their experience. Ooh, how do we maximize these ideas that I have about what it means to live good or have a life worth living? How do
Mm.
I help facilitate that for others?
Mhm.
And because in that, ultimately, when we really look close, and again, some of us are going to emphasize or focus on different things. But when we really look at that and address that question, other people are going to be involved in that some way, somehow, be it through the people we love, connections, and all of that kind of stuff. And when we start to really do that and look closely at that, we're going to be like, oh, this me. In order for me to fully live this a wonderful life, I ultimately want other people to live well as well, because
Absolutely.
when they live well, I live well, and
Exactly.
we live well, because
Exactly.
we're not isolated beings.
Mhm.
So that's why this question is so important, because it I think it ultimately it can, or it's a part of this overall process of addressing the concerns that you've laid out.
Mhm.
Those of us who are, I'm here in California now, and
Mm.
I have privilege access to all kinds of different things that someone in Sudan right now
Yeah.
don't have access to.
Mhm.
And okay, then I have this privilege, I have these things. I think it's my duty to think about deeply, because I have the space,
Mhm.
I have the capacity,
Mhm.
the privilege to think deeply about these things, and to also take care of myself and do the things that are necessary to make my life better, and to try to encourage others to do the same thing in some way. It may not look like my life, of course,
Mhm.
but to at least explore and dig into it, because then those of us in these privileged situations, we have voting power, we have all
Exactly.
of these different things. We can influence others through community, through conversation, through dialogue that has implications on people around the world. And so I think it can. This conversation, it may appear small. I'm not saying you think it's this way, but just kind of talking to the audience here. It may appear small, this conversation, but the implications of this type of conversation, and why I'm having this conversation with you, Rita, your different background, you're from Canada, we're different colors, and it's just we just have different experience, but we can have this conversation and to show the world that this conversation is so important.
Mhm.
The more we have this conversation, the more, the greater the impact of um, this conversation through our actions.
Mhm.
Because if we're thinking seriously about this, it's going to inform the choices that we make in our
Mhm.
daily lives that can have implications on people. And you know, everyone knows what's going on in the media with Gaza, Ukraine, Iran. I'm like, no one talks about, what's going on in Africa, for instance,
And
or I'm
Sudan
not
and right. Yeah.
Sudan. Like, it's
Exactly.
horrible, and
Absolutely.
like, so like, folks, we
And what's
need
going
to
on in
do
America?
this
Let's
in America, everywhere,
yeah.
and to really think about all of these different things, and give some attention to it,
Mhm.
because I think. it will address the things that you started this off with when you're talking about the good life. And you say you have the capacity to the what, I don't know
Great
your exact words,
fortune,
but
the great
the great
fortune,
fortune,
should I be
yeah,
so lucky?
to have
Yeah.
all of these different things, and
Hmm.
and then all these people are suffering, and I
Hmm.
think that's why it's I think because I think we're a human family, and it's our
Hmm.
responsibility for those who have this privilege to take advantage of this privilege for the sake of others, and trying to and say, hey neighbor, hey friend, um, we can think about things differently. We need to figure out a way to to live differently so we can help mitigate this foolishness that we human beings can engage in, and the kind of harm that we can impose on each other. It's just crazy. It's so dark. Um, I don't know. This is our way of trying to shine a little light, but also gain some insight and seeing what we can do to make the world a better place. This is my take on this. I'm just ripping off of what you said earlier, and kind of trying to convey to you, but the audience, about the importance of this conversation and the importance of what you said about the craziness that we human beings tend to do to each other, and how we can
It's
resolve it.
it's really long standing, you know. I mean, this is why there's so many of us so engaged in trauma work now, and the understanding of trauma work and the
Mm-hmm.
legacy of it. It's like, I mean,
Yeah.
the good life can come through really hard. It is hard work. It is hard work to engage our own ancestral line and just
Mm-hmm.
understand the, what's gotten into us, what's affected us. I mean, I can't believe, like, as I do medicine work, as I experience medicine work, I I actually wanted to say this. Like, I've been so fortunate to go, oh my God, I was affected by Hitler, and I wasn't even alive during Hitler. Like, I was affected. Like, there's a
Right?
cellular impact here, right? And how did that show up
Yeah.
in me? Like, being in competition with other women. I mean, it's so. I find it's a good life to go, God, that was revealed to me, and I could see the cell of Hitler inside of me, and to
Mm-hmm.
go, oh well, let's clear that energy from there, or and then to go, oh wow, that had me in competition with women. There was that competitive streak, that kind of one-upmanship, and so the good life is to be able to do the trauma work and do it in groups, and do it with others, and be able to go to the medicine and go to the ayahuasca, and clear those dark forces that live within all of us. To deny that is dangerous.
Yep.
And I wanted to say just recently, I do want to, I don't want to sound doomsday, but I have to, I'm deeply affected by everything that's happening right now. I'm not going to lie, but I really had to make a point of, looking out into my front yard. It's a tiny little front yard. It's really sweet. It's got 3 trembling aspen and 3 white birch that are starting, little still baby
Mm.
birches, and 2 little garden boxes, and like a little fairy yard. It's not very big, but it's been so beautiful to watch the rain and to see the glistening sun, when the sun bursts out from behind the clouds and it's just hitting the raindrops on the leaves. And it's such a mystical time, such a magical time in the spring when things are growing. And it fills me with hope when I can see my garden growing, and that I planted these seeds and it's coming, and that I can, get one harvest of radish out of here, or get some arugula growing, and to feel the energy of life coming through, and seeing the bees and the little squirrels running through. And it's such an important, I want to say, if you can, no matter, even if all you have is a pot of mint or some herb growing, it's so important to tend plants, to tend gardening, to tend something that we can tangibly see growing. It's part of us, right? And it is so healing to spend that time, um, in a garden, or sitting in the grass, or sitting with nature, sitting by the river. Um, how it changes our energy, and that if we could just put our phones down and put the technology down long enough, and Yeah, I went on this foraging course on the weekend and I had no idea all the things that the pine tree offers. You know, all the indigenous people talking about like this, if you had only one tree, what tree would that be? It would be the pine, right? And just eating spruce tips. And by the time I came home that evening, we'd already made my husband and I had made some spruce salt, where you ground up the
Mm.
spruce tips and then combined it with salt, and we're already eating it. And it was just this incredible gift of nature, and how important it is to just say thank you. Is it okay if we take something from the earth? I mean, that's the other part. It's just the understanding of the incredible impact that we have on the earth and what it's giving us. I mean, we're talking about this. Everybody's talking about this. We're not enough people are talking about this, but the good life really comes from the earth too. It's not just about embodied empathy and responsiveness and care, but it's the embodied empathy, responsiveness, and care for the earth and how we use it. Recently, my husband and I went down to being a one car family, and I feel really proud of that. I don't have enough money to buy an electric car at this point in my life, but I feel really good about just, sharing a vehicle and glorying that footprint and getting on the bike as often as I can, you know, walking wherever I can. But just noticing that those little things really do make a difference. They do add up, you know? It's the conscientious
Yes,
life. If I say the good life is
that's
the
it.
conscientious life, right? Um, I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. There are indulgences that I love that I'm working on. But, I think too of just the care that we take with how we dress ourselves. I think about people in refugee camps where they've got this one piece of clothing and they wash it every day because it matters to them, to their hygiene matters, or what. It's the small ways that we can make a little bit of humanity in inhumane conditions, or times when we're feeling down. How can we just take a look at the colors around us a little bit, you know?
Hmm.
Or, in the spring, walking and smelling lilac trees. I just love the spring when you
Oh,
can put your face in a
so good.
lilac bush and just breathe
Uh
it in.
huh.
I
Oh,
think those are moments of good life. Those to
right.
me are moments of good life.
And you know what? And I think it's when I folks say when I use word language is limited. When I say responsibility, I'm not like it's not punitive
Hmm.
way of looking at responsibility.
Hmm.
But I feel like it's my responsibility to stick my face in that lilac and smell. It's so
Yeah.
wonderful,
Yeah.
and I think not because it's not because I know I don't feel like I'm an isolated being. I think that sums up a lot of what you said when you said I think the good life is a conscientious life. That's what I take from the very beginning. You're basically there's a lot of horrible things going on. It's easy to give attention to that and to draw that out.
Hmm.
And I'm so glad you brought a lot of that stuff up because I think what you're saying is what's good about life is I need to be conscious of what's going on and not
Hmm.
pretending that these things are not happening. And you
Exactly.
said about when you said doing trauma work and you said look inside of myself and say you're doing a psychedelic medicine to help facilitate that, but I can go in there. It enhances my capacity to be conscious or
Hmm.
aware of various dimensions of my being. And when I say my, particularly when you're doing something like psychedelics, you realize it's not just you and your
Yeah.
own body,
Yeah.
it's everything. When
Hmm.
I start to take attention and give attention to that, and I just snip out, or I help work through that traumatic thing, not just my own personal trauma, but the collective
No,
trauma. If I can
collective.
help, exactly, when I help to
Yeah.
work through all of that, I can
Yeah.
do interpersonal work
Yeah.
to heal.
Yeah.
That interpersonal work to heal is also facilitating the healing of humanity.
Absolutely.
And some might like, oh, someone might think that this is woo woo or something. No, it's not. When we do that inner work, like you said, that you are impacted by Hitler. I am impacted by Hitler. And here I'm an African American here in the United States. We are all impacted by every crazy person that ever existed. We're all
Absolutely.
impacted by every good person that ever existed. So
Hmm.
how do we work through those things in ourselves and in our
Hmm.
relationships with others, in our relationship with the ecology around us from the earth?
Hmm.
How do we work through these different things? And it
Hmm.
requires what you're saying,
Hmm.
a
Mhm.
conscientious life. And if
Mhm.
you're not, you just got the blinders on and you're just walking around and you're smelling the lilac with the blinders on, you have a lesser impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we can take in that lilac and be like, wow, the beauty of this plant, this growing here, that lilac, that smell is going to have a calming sense to my nervous system. And so when I go out to the grocery store later, that sticking my face in that lilac just may help me, especially if I have this conscientiousness that I am interrelate, I live in an interdependent world. I'm connected with
Mm.
all these different beings, and how I show up has an impact on others' lives.
Mhm.
Oh, I got a beautiful garden. I have these beautiful trees. I have this connection with nature. It's grounded me. And so now when I go into the grocery store and I'm interacting with all of these people,
Mhm.
I'm having an impact on their life.
Yeah.
And when I do my work, my journey work, or whatever work I'm doing to help heal myself, I'm going to have an impact just by how I
Absolutely.
show up.
Yeah.
It's going to affect everything. How I vote. It's going to affect my activism. It's going to affect
Absolutely.
everything. So it's like
Absolutely.
it's not a small thing that when we actually do the work of becoming a much more conscientious person, it is
Mhm.
huge.
Mhm.
It's so big when we decide to do that. And I just think one of the ways to help facilitate, just one, is ask this question: what is a life worth living? I think it can help us open ourselves up to thinking about life in a much more comprehensive way, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm. And I think it's different for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The artist, so many different forms of expression in terms of art, in terms of music, and the protest songs or the not protest songs, or the activist art or the not activist art, but beauty as a response to violence, um,
Mm-hmm.
aesthetics as a response to violence. There's
Yes, I like
so
that.
many different
I like
ways
that.
that we can think of. I mean, the good life can be very, very distorted, billionaires, oligarchs, and their good life, to, the good life of, to me, I think about the Longhouse and the indigenous groups that come together to be together, to do their prayers and their powwows. That to me is like, wow, that's a good life right there.
Yeah.
That they're in their beautiful, their traditional regalia, and they are dancing and singing. To me, that is a healing of the good life for them. And you know, for those that don't have that, there's other ways that we can come together. For me, it's like anytime there's a film festival, whether it's a Justice Film Festival, a queer film festival, or the Calgary International Film Festival, I'm so excited that people can come together to celebrate stories and learn about things that we don't know about, or how a character, an actor, embodies a human. And how,
Yeah.
I recently watched, I was on the plane to Oslo, and I rewatched Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, and watched Frances McDermott. And I love that film. It's such a interesting film. These turnarounds in the characters, these commitments in the character, and they're all wrestling with themselves and wrestling with the indignities and wrestling. But it's a beautiful thing. I mean, when Woody Harrelson character decides to kill himself, and he writes this letter, and he impacts this young cop who's just kind of out for revenge and doesn't see, and then he says this one thing to him that turns him around, right? And it's like, when we dare to say that one thing that may be a little bit uncomfortable to hear or difficult to hear, and go, I'm going to say this thing because I think this thing is really important, and I think it can affect your life in a positive way. So the young cop does turn around, and he changes, and he wants to help. He doesn't want to just persecute people of color, which is what he's been doing. And so he's turning things around and making something with his life. It took one person to kill themselves and write an honest letter and say, this is what I see for your future. I think it's when we stick our necks out and actually say, when we care enough to help someone get on a different path, is so important. Because so often we don't want to say anything, we don't want to be involved, we don't. oh, it's that neighbor over there. We shouldn't stick our nose in each other's business. I think when we do stick our nose in each other's business and come from the heart and actually say, you know what, I'm seeing this happening and I think that you've got the potential for this. Go do it, right? I think, I was listening to I love Uber drivers. I learned so much from them. An Eritrean Uber drivers said to me, Africa is different. He says, there's nothing like connection in Africa. He says, everyone's children are everyone's children. It's not just your children over there. He says, if someone is beating the child next door, we take that child and we bring that child over here to our house because it's everybody's children, and that to me is a better life where we're not
Yeah.
just letting this happen over at the neighbors and you don't say anything because you don't want to offend anyone. I think we need to be able to offend each other. We need to be able to offend each other and say, hey, I don't like what's happening over here. And this child is everyone's child, you know?
Mm. So much good stuff. I'm going to come back come back to your theme I guys think you're speaking of this conscientious life.
Mm-hmm.
And how important that is in so many ways, in so many facets, and being sensitive and showing care, and and being open to explore ourselves in the world and try to make sense out of the world, and suffering in the world challenges us to think. Hopefully, I think it's
Hopefully.
challenging us to be more conscientious
Mm-hmm.
of the world, and to feel that pain. And when we feel that pain and empathize with that pain, hopefully it inspires us to do something about it and to try to transform our lives in a way that we can be a reflection to others in some capacity,
Mm-hmm.
to be an exemplar to others in some capacity, and to, when you said something that you're not perfect, no, I don't think nobody's perfect. None of us are going to be perfect. I don't get into that, oh, you're enlightened being, whatever. Like, I'm
No,
like,
but
don't focus on that. It's a path to enlightenment, and
mm-hmm.
that's nothing wrong with being on a path to enlightenment. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But to recognize that we're imperfect, we're fallible creatures,
Totally.
and what we can do is do the best that we can. And I think it requires that conscientiousness that you're speaking of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No,
Mm-hmm.
this has been great. We're at the closing time or mark
Yeah,
here. Do you have a few more minutes?
I have a few more minutes.
I want to ask you two more questions, but
Sure.
this question is about, in general, about psychedelics, because I think people can be rather confused about psychedelics. It's
Mm-hmm.
becoming much more popularized
Mm-hmm.
with the likes of Michael Pollan,
Mm-hmm.
and there are other people. And there's a lot of good things that are happening around psychedelics, but I think
Mm-hmm.
some people still don't quite understand
Mm-hmm.
uh, what the point, what's the point of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love someone
Mm-hmm.
such as yourself to share
Mm-hmm.
what's that relationship between psychedelics. You kind of hinted at it, but psychedelics in a life worth living, or living well. How can you
Well,
tie those together?
well, first of all, I just want to say that not all psychedelics are the same. They have their unique
Mm-hmm.
quality and characteristics, and are really, you have to be very skillful and thoughtful, those administering it, as to what kind of psychedelic is best for someone and their developmental stages. So people can go towards a psychedelic that doesn't match where they are developmentally. But I just wanted to say that. Um, and what psychedelics don't make it easier. Psychedelics are hard work. They're really hard
Mm-hmm.
work because, and you have to be very prepared. You have to have obviously the right relationships to support it, the right community to support it, and you need a certain level of embodiment to meet difficult material, because it's not just, it expands the field of what we're not conscious of. It expands this field of what's living inside of us. Like that one cell that I found in me, I was like, oh shit, that was influenced by Hitler. Oh my God. Like, then instead of like, oh, I don't want to see that and turn away, I have to integrate the knowledge of this. So it's really, really hard work. It makes it harder. It's easier in the moment because you can access other levels that you've forgotten, or other realms, or other information. But then you have to be able to come back into this world and use this information productively and generatively, and in an embodied way, for change within ourselves and in our communities, so that it's not just for my own healing, but for our communal healing. And, we have to have skilled guides, therapists, practitioners, and communities that get the nugget of learning, because there can be so much in a psychedelic session that we get lost and swim around and not know what are all meant. But to be able to narrow down the transmission, to go, how can I put this effectively into my everyday life, to make a difference here? So I just want to say, it is not the easy stuff that you go, oh, you got your MDMA and my PTSD is gone, or I'm taking my psilocybin and my depression's gone. It's a lot more work than that. And, but it's offering us an expanded possibility to see different ways that we can relate to each other, that we can relate to our lives, our planets, to our history, and to the future, of for the spark of inspiration for the future, and for forgiveness. It's really for forgiveness, to be able to forgive our ancestors, and forgive our parents, and forgive these forces that have accumulated within us. So it's not easy work. It's hard work, but it's very fulfilling work, really fulfilling work.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned earlier about, this whole thing is it's not easy. It's hard work. You got to put the work in. You got to put the energy, effort, and
Yeah, the
time into doing
engagement.
these things.
Mm-hmm.
The engagement, yes, thank you. The engagement. And yeah, these substances, these medicines can help facilitate that. And I'm glad you said that way, because this audience, and I think this audience is going to continue to grow, and this is going to be recorded and they're available to people. And I say this about the work I do around meditation and these various practices about personal
Mm-hmm.
development
Mm-hmm.
and cultivating yourself ethically and morally. I never said it's easy. None of
No,
this is easy.
no,
We have to cultivate new habits, and yeah, you might have a wonderful experience on a psilocybin or a mushroom or something like that, and great. Ultimately, though, there's an integration process, and
mm-hmm.
if we don't integrate that powerful experience, those experiences, and that integration can take a lifetime. You're just
Totally.
constantly working through and transforming, and that's why it's beautiful work. And I'm happy to see that more people are open to it. I think people in political positions of
Mm-hmm.
political power, even here in the United States, you got people in the Republican and the Democratic Party recognize and sees the value of this. And I don't
Yeah,
know how
thank
long it's
goodness.
going to take,
Yeah.
but we're in the process of moving in that direction, and it's good to hear voices like yourself, encouraging people. Like, this is not an easy process. When you do this work, you're doing the work. This is
Oh
about
yeah, there's no
getting
turning
there
back.
and doing the hard work. And I think that, to kind of tie to this rest of this conversation, is that when we do this work, we're having an impact not just on our lives. We're having an impact on the lives of
Mm-hmm.
others and how we show up. But I think that we do tap into these other realms, these other spaces where that can be translated. It's going
Mm-hmm.
to inform and impact the lives of others, even if we never meet them in person, even if
Yeah.
we never come into contact with them. There's these other realms where we are
Other
all
forms of
interconnected.
wisdom, right? Other
Other
forms of
forms of
wisdom from
wisdom,
the earth wisdom, right? There's other
right?
forms, the animal wisdom, right? There's so spirit wisdom, so many forms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, Rita. One
Thank
last
you.
question.
Yeah.
What are there any final thoughts you have for the audience? Anything you would like to say to the audience here?
Yeah, just take a moment to consider that you don't know what someone else has been through.
Mm.
And just to remember the sacredness of each person and the sacredness of this life. How that just sending sometimes a prayer towards someone, you might pass them on the street. I don't mean a religious prayer, but just a blessing. Just a blessing for someone that you might see that's unhoused, or a blessing towards a photograph of a child you might see who's lost a limb. Just send a blessing. I think that we can send energetic love and care when you feel hopeless on those days. Just send a blessing to someone.
Awesome. Thank you. You have so much care in you, and I love it. I
Aw,
love
thank
it.
you. And
I
so do you. You
love
have
it.
so much care, and I feel how important it is for you to generate a sense of life and possibility. So I really appreciate and applaud you for having this podcast to bring up the life force.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming here, and
It's been
it
a
means a lot to
pleasure.
me for you to say that, and coming here and sharing and exploring in this big question, these big questions, and playing. We just had this playing experience together, using language, but trying to understand each other and see where we're coming from. And this is not an argument, it's not a debate, it's much more of a playful interaction and exploring, trying to understand one another and trying to highlight what's possible. And what drives and motivates me is more, I just want to see more love in the world, folks.
I'm with
And
you.
uh, I know you do.
I'm
I
with
know
you,
you
man.
are. And I feel your passion. I feel your passion for people. I feel your care. And that's so important. And I really want to, that sits with me. Have a good life is a conscientious life.
Yeah,
As
beautiful.
I'm with you
Thank you.
100% on
Thank you.
that. So thank you so much.
And thank you, and blessings to you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.